Good evening. It is Tuesday, the 29th of June, 2021, and today was a big day in the News24 newsroom, as it was, I'm sure, in all the newsrooms across not only South Africa, but globally. Late afternoon, I received a push notification from the New York Times on my cell phone, alerting me that former South African President Jacob Zuma has been sent to jail for refusing to cooperate with the Zondo Commission into inquiry. And that's why we are here tonight, unplanned. I was definitely looking forward to watching Roger Federer play in Wimbledon tonight, as he is currently, but I haven't had a moment to look at that match because I was reading the judgment by Constitutional Court judgment Sisi Kampepe and 6 of her colleagues, sending Zuma to jail. Finally, some will say. My name is Adriaan Basson, editor of News24, and I am privileged and honored to be joined tonight in this special episode of News24 Frontline by my colleagues Gunita Hunter, our political editor, Karen Moon, our specialist legal writer, and Peter de Tooy, our assistant editor for In-Depth News. Welcome, colleagues. I hope you've had a chance to eat and drink something after this whirlwind of a day. This judgment, which I have in front of me, is very long and very good. And in fact, there's 2 judgments, which Karen will explain to us in a moment why that is. But it is a big day, Gunita. It's a big day for South Africa's judiciary. It's a big day for politics. It's a big day for the ANC, for our democracy, for the rule of law. Why is this judgment so very important?
Adriaan, I think, for years and years and years, we've been hearing Jacob Zuma saying that he's not afraid of jail. He has repeated it over and over again as he desecrated the Constitution, pushed the limits, trampled all over the Constitution and effectively proven over and over again that he is a constitutional delinquent. Now, what today's judgment does is saying, no more. And this is what acting Chief Justice Sisi Kampepe did today. We're almost drawing a line in the sand to say, you will not defile the Constitution and the judiciary in the way that you have been, because Jacob Zuma effectively did not, even sort of bother to make an argument to this court and just continued his public utterances saying things like, this is a manipulation. They started this narrative saying that there's an emergence of a judicial dictatorship, and that the democracy has been captured by judges. And so the court said today that this is it. You're no longer allowed to do so. And by being in contempt of court, you will go to jail for 15 months.
So just to be clear to our readers and viewers and colleagues, Jacob Zuma today was found guilty, Gunita, by the Constitutional Court of Contempt of Court for refusing to appear before the Zondo Commission and for transgressing that ruling, a previous ruling by the Constitutional Court, that he had to appear before the Zondo Commission. He refused. So he was firstly convicted today by the Constitutional Court, which in itself is an oddity, and then sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. Karen Moon, you have seen and watched and read hundreds, if not thousands, of court judgment in your career and life. Is this one special, and why? Karen, you're just on mute for us. Thank you. It's been a long day.
Well, is it unmuted now?
Yes, there you go.
Fantastic. Well, Acting Deputy Chief Justice Sisi Kampepe actually says throughout her judgment that this is a unique case. The thing is with contempt, is it's kind of the legal equivalent of your mother telling you that you're on her last nerve, and if you don't pull yourself towards yourself, you're going to get a fat clap. Usually with most people, that's enough to go, okay, let me comply with the court's directive. Let me do what I need to. Let me come to my court appearance. Let me, if I'm a government minister, do what I've been ordered to do for the court, or at least explain why I failed to do so. It's never something, it's always a bullet in the gun, but it's never ever fired. Today it was fired. And it was fired because Jacob Zuma has continuously, in a repeated fashion, made it clear that while he claims to have been persecuted by the Constitutional Court because he believes he's being mistreated, he fundamentally has an issue with the principle of equality before the law. Jacob Zuma does not believe that he should have been, asked to answer questions by the Commission of Inquiry. He does not believe he should have been required to defend himself or explain why he refused to do so. He has produced a number of sort of pseudo-legal arguments, which Kampepe decimates in her judgment to try and excuse his failure to comply. And ultimately, the court's saying, look, this is a manifestly unique situation. It's a former head of state. There is no precedent for a court ordering someone into jail in this manner. It is something that has been legally available to the courts. They have not done so because the threat of this has actually got people to comply. And that is at the heart of the dissent that we now see playing out between the majority of the court and, Justice Liana Turan and Chris Jafta.
Karen, it was very clear from the beginning of the judgment. I mean, if we just look at the very start of the majority judgment that Justice Kampepe wrote, and she starts with a quotation from former President Nelson Mandela in 1995 when he inaugurated the Constitutional Court. She's quoting him when he said, "We expect you to stand on guard, not only against direct assault on the principles of the Constitution, but against insidious corrosion." And then she continues to say, "It is indeed the lofty and lonely work of the judiciary, impervious to public commentary and political rhetoric, to uphold, protect, and apply the Constitution and the law at any and all costs." I mean, from the get-go, there's this, I think Juanita referred to it as the thick line in the sand to say, until here and no further.
Absolutely. And she states continuously that this judgment is fundamentally about rule of law. Because if you have a situation where Jacob Zuma is not held accountable for defiance of the highest court in the country, as a former president, as someone who swore in his oath of office to uphold the Constitution, then an ordinary person being brought into a maintenance court, an ordinary person being summoned to appear in court for a traffic fine, an ordinary person who's on trial for some misdemeanor will turn around and say, well, if the rules don't apply to Jacob Zuma, why should they apply to me? And that is at the heart of this ruling. It's about rule of law. It's about the unassailable principle that all of us are equal before the law, and we all need to uphold, we need to comply with rulings that are given against us. And that is at the heart of this judgment.
Peter de Tooy, can you take us back to where this case started? Because now we're talking about a contempt of court conviction and imprisonment. But this case had a long history, starting with the former public protector, Thuli Madonsela, right?
Adriaan, yes. I don't think when Jacob Zuma met Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector, one nondescript October morning in October 2016, when she met him at the Union buildings after numerous attempts to meet with him and to discuss some of the allegations made against him, in which she was compelled to investigate as the public protector. I don't think he realized what train of events he put in motion that day. If you cast your mind back to October 2016, Thuli Madonsela was tasked by her office to investigate various allegations amounting to what we now know was state capture complaints that were laid in March of that year of 2016. And every single attempt by Thuli Madonsela, her office and her investigators to secure a meeting with then sitting President Jacob Zuma was rebuffed by the president. And the only reason why the president at that stage, at that very late stage in October 2016, granted Thuli Madonsela an interview at his office at the Union buildings was because Thuli Madonsela was supposed to vacate her office within weeks after that. And he simply thought that by batting all these attempts by Madonsela away, by refusing to grant her an audience, by leaving it until the very last minute, that Thuli Madonsela will not be able to draw any conclusions, much less finish a report detailing or giving us the first outline of state capture. And reading through the transcripts again of that very fateful meeting in October 2016, Karen spoke about the rule of law. Another theme throughout this very seminal and significant judgment is one about accountability. Jacob Zuma, from the very beginning, refused to submit himself to the accountability of Parliament, of his own party, and of the law. And on that day, Adriaan, I would argue that's where a train of events were set in motion, which will soon lead to him probably arriving at one of our state-of-the-art correctional facilities where he will don an orange uniform. So he refused to answer questions by Thuli Madonsela on that day. She did, in fact, as we all know, complete a report titled the State of Capture, which enjoined the then Chief Justice to appoint someone to lead a commission of inquiry to investigate state capture. The commission was eventually, ironically, constituted and signed into law by none other than Jacob Zuma himself. But as always, the arrogance, the impunity, and the brazenness of Zuma dictated that he thought he could control the process, that he could refuse to appear in front of the commission and refuse to account for his time as head of state. Now, it's not something new, as the judge said today. Jacob Zuma refusing to comply with norms, with procedure, is to be expected. He refused to appear in front of the commission. The commission tried its level best to try and get him to appear in front of the commission. The judge or the judgment today also details the efforts that the commission went through to try and ensure his participation. After that, after the commission was forced to go to court, the Constitutional Court bent over backwards to try and accommodate him as well, to ensure that he took part in this legal process, to protect his constitutional rights. So everyone went out of their way, Adriaan, to as the court said today, to comply with the law. But it had a long build-up. It started in October 2016. It moved very quickly with the release of the State of Capture report, the establishment of the commission, Zuma's first appearance in 2019, I think it was, if I remember correctly, and where we are today, after a very contentious and difficult legal process, where within 5 days, he is going to have to go to jail.
And Peter, I remember that the interview was the infamous one where Thuli Madonsela told Michael Hulley, Zuma's former attorney, that he's not the president's mouth, that he's his attorney, but he's not his mouth. I remember that quote vividly. Quinita, is it fair enough to say then, if we have to surmise, that Jacob Zuma is going to prison for refusing to answer questions about his relationship with the Guptas and how that culminated in state capture?
That, and he's also going to jail for the level of disregard he's shown to the Constitution. And he's a serial offender. It happened time and time again. This was the straw that broke the camel's back, because he pushed and pushed and pushed to the point that he knew, there was a thought that went through my mind earlier, is that for Jacob Zuma, he's going to jail for defying the Constitution, but inevitably he's going to have to go to jail for what he did in relation to state capture, right? But the reality of it is that you have a man who uses victimhood as a survival strategy. So the pariah in his story was Thuli Madonsela, and then it became his enemies within the ANC. Or, even before Thuli Madonsela, it was perhaps the media and the opposition. Then it was Thuli Madonsela. Then effectively, he was ready to comply with the commission. He went to the commission, said a whole lot of hogwash. When he was called again to be accountable and to answer direct questions, he realizes, oopsie, I can't do this, because obviously all fingers are pointing to him when it comes to the state capture project. And as a result now, then deciding to go on and create the image of Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo as this, pariah coming out for him, making all sorts of accusations and accusing him of being unfair towards him with no evidence, and then now sits firmly in a place of victimhood where the judiciary is this grand conspirator for his downfall. And I think this just continues his narrative. And I think that he thought he will get away with it, as he constantly has gotten away with it for years and years and years, creating these sort of side battles at the point now, where the Constitutional Court has made a judgment. It cannot be appealed. He has to go to court. He has to go to prison. If he does not go to prison, the Minister of Police and the National Police Commissioner have to take action. Otherwise, they will face. And so I think the great story of Jacob Zuma, the victim, has come to an end. I think that's what today's judgment is.
There's a quote from the judgment which I just want to quickly read on this point, where Judge Kampepe writes, "His conduct demonstrates a deliberate choice to, instead of furnishing this court with mitigating factors, once again air his views through inflammatory statements intended to undermine this court's authority and portray himself as a victim of the law." So Judge Kampepe did deal with that. Juanita, in the aftermath of today's very scathing and lasting and humongous judgment, what has been the reaction so far at this time, just after 7 on Tuesday evening? What do we know about Zuma's own reaction to the judgment, the reaction of the ANC, the governing party, as well as the Zondo Commission?
Okay, so in terms of Jacob Zuma, that sort of initial, I'm not afraid of jail sort of came out when his daughter first tweeted to say that he will be handing over himself at the Nkandla police station. The Jacob Zuma Foundation said, they're consulting their legal team and they'd make a statement, but now they've decided they're not going to make a statement because obviously it's crystal clear within 5 days he has to appear before jail. A handful of his supporters who form under the umbrella of the Radical Economic Transformation sub-faction of the ANC, if you like, they have come out and have taken digs at the judiciary, saying, where does he go to from here? Where does he, how does he, how do judges allowed to make such a judgment without any recourse? And they're obviously also trying to use the minority judgment, which I think Karen will talk more about, as their political tool to say, see what the other judges are saying, and almost creating this narrative that there is this, Justice Kampepe and those who concurred with her had this sort of they were vindictive against the former president. Obviously, and quite predictably, opposition parties are quite elated by the judgment. There was a tweet that just went out now from EFF leader Julius Malema saying that this was the Constitutional Court upholding the rule of law, but at the same time saying to Jacob Zuma, all will be well, this will pass too. So almost sort of a double-edged response from Julius Malema. The ANC saying that, they note the judgment, but almost calling for calm, for me, creating an impression that, people are going to come out and in their numbers. Other opposition parties have been very, very celebratory, and as well as civil society organizations who obviously have worked and fought really hard for this type of outcome. And so it's quite fascinating to see what the ANC will say further when they meet. The National Executive Committee meets over the weekend, but I think by the time they're done, Jacob Zuma will have to be in jail.
Can I just say that I think, and Karen will, I suppose, can give us the detail and the nitty-gritty, but this court judgment made short shrift of many of the more spurious arguments that were put forward by the RET sub-faction, like Juanita terms them. The court judgment is clear and very logical in the way that it breaks down its reasoning, why Zuma is guilty of contempt, what the repercussions of his egregious and scandalous actions, as the court termed them, are, and the various arguments that were put not to the court but in the public domain why Zuma was being targeted by the court, allegedly, why the commission or why the Deputy Chief Justice could not preside over Zuma's appearance at the commission. And a lot of these narratives, as Konita mentioned, made its way into the public domain, made its way into social media, became the popular narrative of those who are aligned to Jacob Zuma in the RET faction, trying to whip up emotion and trying to whip up support. If anything, this court judgment confirmed that real life is not Twitter. Real life happens in a country that is a country of laws and statutes, like we are trying to be. And it confirmed that all of these narratives that are put forward by those that try to muddy the waters, that try to shape and shape a narrative to attack the courts in order to create an environment where someone like Jacob or Julius Malema that Konita just mentioned can attack the courts, and where attacks on the courts, are made out, where the courts are made out to be in the pockets of WMC or the West, or whatever conspiracy theories are put forward. This judgment put paid to that. It laid it to rest. It makes it very clear that we are a country of laws, and that when you transgress those laws, that the courts will deal with you in accordance with our jurisprudence, in accordance with the Constitution, and in accordance with the type of country that we want to be. And I think that's so important, that Twitter and social media and RET and videos released by Carl Niehaus is not real life.
Yeah.
Court judgment by the Constitutional Court, that's where the buck stops.
Karen Moen, I want us to go to the minority judgment. This may become the most famous minority judgment of all time. Normally, we just kind of leave that one alone because it's got no impact really. But this minority judgment, and if this was a game of tennis, which it wasn't, the score would have been 7-2 in the favor of just Kampepe's judgment. But there is a minority judgment wrote by Justice Leona Turon and supported by Judge Chris Jafta. What does that judgment say, and how does it differ from the majority judgment?
Well, first of all, Justice Chris Jafta was the justice who actually gave the original decision compelling Jacob Zuma to testify before the inquiry, and saying that he did not have a blanket right to silence. He only had a limited right against self-incrimination, and if he chose to exercise it, he would have to identify the crime that he was implicated in. Of course, that was one of the bases of Jacob Zuma's most vociferous attacks on the judiciary, and the basis upon which he accused the Constitutional Court of treating him much like the apartheid state had treated Robert Sobukwe, the PAC leader whose imprisonment was unlawfully extended. Leona Turon, of course, was the judge who, with CJ Mogoeng, disagreed with the majority of the court on the Saab ruling, finding that it was problematic that a personal cost order be issued against the public protector. So not someone who is afraid to disagree with the majority of the court, ultimately saying in her ruling that while Jacob Zuma was, clearly guilty of contempt of court, it was not within the ambit of the court to issue what she described as a purely punitive sanction against him. She was saying that essentially contempt orders needed to be utilized as a mechanism to compel litigants to do what they should have done in the first place. And in this instance, that would be for Jacob Zuma to go to the inquiry and to testify. So in other words, issue him with a suspended sentence, compel him to testify, and then if he doesn't, he would face imprisonment. Of course, the majority of the court, Kampepe, saying, well, essentially, he would still have gone to jail by your logic. So that's just an elongated process. And it's very clear that Jacob Zuma has absolutely no intention of complying with any court order to that effect. He's made that clear. And that in elongating this process, we're just going to reinforce the perception that some people may be more equal before the law than others are. Also what was interesting was Turon arguing that in the event that there was clear criminal defiance of a court order, it was really in the hands of the NPA to make a determination whether or not there should be a prosecution. And she mistakenly says in her judgment that Raymond Zondo did not refer Jacob Zuma's criminal contempt of the commission to the NPA. In fact, he did. There were two incidents of non-compliance with the court, with the inquiry. The first, of course, being in relation to the walkout of the inquiry, which occurred in November 2020, where there was a directive issued by the inquiry that criminal charges
recording stopped.
They were. And the problem, of course, being that instance shows
Recording in progress.
when we expect the NPA to take over in these particular situations, there isn't a clear-cut and immediate determination of non-compliance or contempt, and it isn't easily resolved. Fascinatingly, Tehran arguing that this approach had been adopted in relation to P.W. Botha, the erstwhile apartheid prime minister's defiance of the TRC, where the TRC had gone to the NPA and laid criminal charges against him. So why did the inquiry not do the same thing? Well, the inquiry did. It did do the same thing. And Kampepe is saying in her argument that this, the judgment, this is a completely unsubstantiated argument, because in this instance, the inquiry went to the court and said, we're not going to allow a P.W. Botha situation to emanate. We're going to court to make sure that this man answers for what he needs to answer to. And when he defied the Constitutional Court, it issued contempt of court proceedings, not, as in the P.W. Botha case, an issue where there was a defiance of a summons under the TRC Act at the time. So saying these two cases are manifestly different, they can't be compared. But what is fascinating about this dissent is the level of kind of, I don't know how to put this in less colloquial terms, judicial scritchiness between these two sides of the fence here, because there's a lot of very, very strong language exchanged between these two justices, within the boundaries of very circumspect legal language that indicates that, they fundamentally disagree on this point, and they fundamentally, Leona Tehran going as far as to say that the Constitutional Court has acted unconstitutionally towards Jacob Zuma. And as Juanita points out, that, of course, is going to be emblazoned on the T-shirts of the RET faction for some time to come.
And in every single quote Mzwanele Manye gives from tonight on going forward, be sure.
Doesn't
and
matter,
Cornelius.
man. Doesn't matter, man.
Well, that's what I want to ask Karen before we move on. Peter says, doesn't matter, man. Karen, is that true? The minority judgment doesn't have any impact on what happens next?
No, legally speaking, it doesn't. It's a dissenting ruling. It has no impact. Where it does have impact, of course, is in the so-called court of the public opinion, which this judgment very much tried to deal with. And the level of scathing critique that Tehran offers based on misguided facts, because she remains adamant that she questions why Zondo did not go to the NPA when in fact he did. And that kind of conspiratorial aspect to that judgment, I think, is going to foment a lot of disquiet and a lot of the spur on the sort of conspiratorial dimensions of some of Jacob Zuma's most ardent supporters.
Peter, I want to come back to you about this moment. I think there will be a lot of developments over the next few days, and there'll be a lot of attention on which prison and what cell and how long and medical parole and whatever. But let's just talk about the moment again. The ANC fought against apartheid, fought a liberation struggle based on the constitutionalism, human rights, and the rule of law. And that is the system that the ANC under Nelson Mandela, Albert Sisulu, and others installed when they were elected to rule this country in 1994. In fact, the Constitutional Court that today sent Zuma to prison was a being of that negotiated process of handing over power before 1994. This is an ANC president, the first one, under a democratic South Africa being sent to prison. How big is this moment, and what will be the impact on the level of impunity, the level of state capture, unfettered abuse of power that we have seen day after day after day emerging from testimony in front of Judge Zondo? Do you think this is a turning moment for the country?
Adriaan, I don't think that the significance of this moment can be underplayed. You reference the negotiation process which led to the formation of a constitutional court. Remember, before 1994, we were a country where Parliament had sovereignty. So Parliament had more power in the country than the courts did. And during the negotiation process, we decided to make the Constitution the ultimate arbiter of the law. And the Constitutional Court, as Judge Kampepe so eloquently writes in her judgment, is the keeper of the Constitution, which was established in 1995. And the judgment starts off, and you mentioned it earlier, with Nelson Mandela saying, we expect you to stand guard. So we are a country, and we want to be a country of laws, Adriaan. We want to be a country where the judiciary is respected, and where the judiciary is seen to be respected, and not only seen to be respected by people at grassroots level, but most definitely by a former president like Jacob Zuma. And this democratic project, which I firmly maintain is worth saving, has been dealt a number of lethal blows over the last decade, with and under Jacob Zuma as the main enabler, the enabler in chief of undermining the rule of law, the courts, the legislatures, our parliament, which is supposed to do oversight over the executive. I mean, all of us have sat watching proceedings in the National Assembly during Zuma's tenure as head of state, where he simply laughed off any attempts to exact accountability over Nkandla, or his links to the Guptas, or corruption at state-owned enterprises. And the Commission of Inquiry into alleged corruption and state capture at state-owned enterprises and other and related institutions of state, is a cathartic moment in the post-1994 dispensation. I know there are enormous amounts of people say that it's a waste of time, but I fundamentally disagree with that. We are a country that I think we've got a very proud tradition and a history of having difficult conversations and pulling ourselves through difficult eras and periods of time. The TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, although imperfect, was such a moment, and I do think the Commission of State, the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, is another one of these creations that ourselves as a country and as a society say, let's face our problems and let's try to do something about it. So the fact that a former ANC president and the ANC released a very terse statement, I thought, I think they're still trying to grapple with what exactly this means. The leader that they elected in 2007 at Polokwane to lead this party is now going to jail. And many of the people that enabled him are still in positions of power in the party and in the state. So it should be a cathartic moment for the ANC as well, whether or not they can respond to this big moment, as you mentioned, because we need to recognize this as a major and a big and a significant moment. Whether they have the gumption to do it, I'm not sure. But will it lead to more accountability? I hope so. But accountability doesn't only stop with the start with the Constitutional Court and Jacob Zuma. It needs to start at magistrate court levels as well. The criminal justice system, which has been undermined and broken over the last decade, we need to foment and create a culture and environment where South Africans respect the rule of law, whether it is related to contempt of court with Jacob Zuma or traffic fines. If we want to be a country of laws and statutes, and if we want to save this democratic project, we need to start insisting on accountability. So I do hope that this judgment sends the right signal to the ANC, to Parliament, and to the public at large, that we are a country of laws. We need to respect the courts, and the public. We need to ensure that we insist on accountability from those that are elected to govern us.
Yeah, I must say, I think it will be a question of time before it's as scarce to find a former Jacob Zuma supporter as it was to find a apartheid supporter. Konita, Hunter, let's quickly talk about politics, your thing. So what does this mean for the ANC? Does it affect the ANC at all? Does it affect balance of power in the ANC? Or does it give more ammo to President Cyril Ramaphosa's Tumamina project to clean up the Zuma years? What's going to happen?
Okay, so I think that where Cyril Ramaphosa sits, he sits firmly at a place where I try to convince him to comply. This is his own actions. This is the consequence. You'd remember the infamous 6-hour meeting or so where the top 6 of the ANC met with Jacob Zuma. He maintained his defiance of the constitution, consistently saying that he was a victim of judicial persecution, of how the courts, selectively quoting the Nicholson judgment and maintaining this long narrative that he has been persecuted by the court of law. And so where Cyril Ramaphosa sits, he can just shrug his shoulders and say, well, I told you can't be in contempt of court and not face the consequence, because the ANC has consistently said that it supports the rule of law and that everyone is equal, and the doctrine that everyone is equal before the law. And as a result, it can't now say, oh, well, please let it not apply to Jacob Zuma. So in terms of that in the ANC, I think that, it's, most of Zuma's detractors will say, but we told you so. We said it in NEC meetings. They said it to you in the top 6 meeting. But there is a narrative brewing. You already heard from someone like Sihle Zikalala, who's very close to Jacob Zuma prior to this, saying, he's made such a big contribution to the Constitution of South Africa, almost that there needs to be a special dispensation. So even just ruling out, the predictable sort of loud haters for Jacob Zuma, even, sort of your rational leaders, there will be a level of sympathy, especially when D-Day comes and he has to hand himself over to jail. There's going to be some sort of, consider his contribution to the struggle, and I think that that conversation is long past, and Justice Kempepe says it in her judgment that this is a result of Jacob Zuma's own doing. He did not file papers when he was asked about a suitable sanction as a result of this. His legal team filed some sloppy letter, unsigned, I think. And as a result, the sanction is really out of his own doing. The other consideration that's going to be made is, he's an old person, and Justice Kempepe preempted this and said, yes, I have taken into consideration his age and his fragility of his health, as a result of his age. But let's talk about what's going to be the best sentence that's going to set a precedent, because what the court wants is that no one should dare violate a court order ever again. And I think that she said it out so eloquently in her judgment, in that if this is allowed to happen, it's going to happen repeatedly by anyone. I have a maintenance order against me. I'll say the court, the magistrate hates me and just don't care. That is the principle. Effectively, that's what leads to the breakdown of constitutional democracy.
Gonita, I do want to ask you quickly this question following from your answer as well. There is an argument that some people made that Jacob Zuma almost wanted to go to prison to become a kind of a martyr, and that, going to prison will make him a martyr and I guess give him more political power than what he currently has. What is your take on that?
I mean, that's particularly plausible, but remember, the tempting of the daring of the judicial system for the last, 5 to 10 years, even longer, of, I'm not afraid of jail. That's where I come from. I'm happy to go back. That was always when jail was never really a possibility. It was always when you had your Stalingrad legal defense system, when you had the manipulated criminal justice system, when you were president and had all of these support. It was not in a world where Justice Kempepe says never and never again, and I think now it's a much different reality, and I think that the silence coming from his quarters this evening or this afternoon is perhaps a level of reality that's sinking in, that this is, because effectively, if he doesn't go and doesn't report to the police station and serve his term, he's a fugitive. And I mean, that has a whole lot of other implications. And effectively, he's, this is his legacy, right? This is what he goes down for, the man who desecrated the Constitution and then went to jail for it.
Karen, how does it practically work from here? So the court gave him 5 court days to report to the Nkandla police station, which Duduzile Zuma says he will do. What happens then?
Well, essentially what happens is that he is processed by the Department of Correctional Services. They would obviously have to do some form of threat assessment, given who he is. I think his medical condition, he's an 80-year-old or 79-year-old type 2 diabetic with a host of medical issues which seem to, occur every time he's in a courtroom and or an inquiry, may prove to be a factor. He's currently under the care of the SANDF, the Surgeon General. I think there will be some issue with the health, I would strongly suspect. But, he then begins to serve his sentence. It's very unlikely that he will, if he serves that time, serve the full 15 months, given that the courts are, given that the DCS system tends to process prisoners who have very short sentences very quickly. And we've seen instances where people who've gotten years have been released after, for instance, 49 days. But that's a separate process. That's in the hands of DCS, currently under the leadership of one Arthur Fraser. And we'll have to see how that plays out in the coming days. The point to be made, though, is that, whether Jacob Zuma goes to jail for 2 days or 100, whatever, he's going to jail. And, South Africans will say, well, it should have been more, whatever. But the massive symbolic moment of a former head of state who, as Juanita has rightly pointed out, has repeatedly used his state funds to avoid criminal charges, rocking up, for example, at his corruption trial in an orange uniform, is something that is going to be seen and the world over. And in a nation where, we have a fundamentally and profound accountability deficit, which continues to define even our modern day processing of issues in relation to our, erstwhile health minister, that is a significant moment in the life of South Africa. So, whether it's a few days or the full 15 months, it's still going to be an important moment for this country.
Important moment indeed. And I think, Karen, it will be interesting to see what happens when the corruption trial starts and you all there in the Pietermaritzburg High Court on the 19th of July when it's scheduled to start. And Jacob Zuma will then be brought in by correctional services and not by black Mercedes-Benz SUVs, as was the case before. And I think I agree with you. That is the symbolism. That is the power of the moment. Peter, we are running out of time, but I do want to quickly ask you to talk about the importance of Thuli Madonsela, Advocate Thuli Madonsela, Professor Thuli Madonsela, as she is these days, and that office of the public protector. Because if we look back at this case tonight and we read the judgment, this started with an advocate, a woman who was appointed, of course, by Parliament and apparently approved by Zuma at the time, quite unknown to the public at the time, Thuli Madonsela, who stood up and said, no, not in my name, no more. And she actually stood in front of him when he wanted to capture the complete state with the Guptas.
Adriaan, does he not rue that moment when he put his signature onto her appointment at the Union Buildings? I'm sure that if he could go back into time, he'd reject that and send it back to Parliament. But Thuli Madonsela was the last bulwark we had during the years of state capture, between total capture and some semblance of the rule of law. The great success of state capture, as we all know, was the manner in which Jacob Zuma maneuvered his people into key positions, whether that is or was at SARS, the Revenue Services, the National Prosecuting Authority, intelligence, all police, all these key institutions of state were the leadership positions were occupied by individuals very much aligned to Jacob Zuma. And Thuli Madonsela, in her unassuming and very soft-spoken way, just also stiffened her back during the years of state capture and said, look, I will not be bullied, I will not be battered. And she went through a very torrid time when she investigated in Nkandla, when she tabled her Nkandla report. She was subjected to all manner of personal attacks, invidious and quite vicious attacks by the ANC and those aligned to Jacob Zuma during that period. But when state capture became this country's most significant post-1994 political problem, Thuli Madonsela was the very last one that stood between us and total capture. And she should get all the plaudits and praise that she deserves, because the state of capture report, which enjoined government and the Constitutional Court to establish this commission of inquiry, gave us this gift of the beginnings of accountability, at least, and ultimately led to Jacob Zuma in a few days' time to be led away into a correctional facility. So Thuli Madonsela is not she's a very much a celebrated hero of democracy, yeah. And I think we can all be so glad that she did that she did stiffen her resolve and see the project through. Without her, we would not be here today.
Karen, you spoke to her today, and in typical Madonsela fashion, she wasn't gloating in the moment. She wasn't cheering on Zuma's going to prison. She said that she's sorry for him and for the legal advice he received.
Yeah, she said to me that someone had actually messaged her and said she must be celebrating, and she said she would never celebrate the downfall of someone else. And just saying that, she completely believed that the judgment was the correct one, that it rightfully enforced the principle of rule of law. But there was something quite tragic with someone who had been such a pivotal part, for example, in, bringing unification to a war-torn KwaZulu-Natal between the IFP and the ANC, who did make a profound contribution to our democracy, at the age of 80, now going into prison. But essentially saying what Justice Kampepe is saying and what Juanita emphasized was, this is his own fault. This is his fault, and this is the fault of his lawyers. And Kampepe in her judgment saying, literally, you left us with no choice. You left us with no choice. You defied the summons to appear. You walked out. You refused to hand over evidence. You refused to put up a defense of yourself in the ConCourt. You refused to respond to the contempt. And when you did respond, it was on public forums, attacking the judiciary, accusing judges of getting money from Cyril Ramaphosa with no evidence, going after Judge Daya Pillay, making all kinds of spurious allegations about her, saying Aubrey Mlambo was somehow implicated in corruption by judges. A series of very serious allegations that had absolutely no basis in fact, comparing yourself to Robert Sobukwe. And inevitably, if the court had stood back and done nothing, as we know, this very well oft-used attempt to portray himself as a victim in the circumstance, it will be fundamentally disingenuous, dishonest, and almost borderline treasonous, because he endangered the entire country with what he did, and he continues to do in referring to a judicial dictatorship. And ultimately, Kampepe, as Madonsela did, drawing in the line in the sand and saying, up to here, you can't go over this line, we're drawing the line. And so, two significant women who have both done significant things for democracy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Juanita Hunter, just lastly from you, on the point of endangering the country, endangering individuals, we heard tonight one of former President Zuma's sons, Edward Zuma, saying that the police will first have to kill him before they arrest his father. Similar statements coming from other Zuma supporters. How do you see the next few days playing out? Do you see the ANC, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal pulling up en masse to Nkandla to protect Zuma from being arrested, or do you think it's going to be a much smaller, less adventurous kind of event?
I think that it's not going to. There's not going to be a politically based sort of showing up in his support. There is no political reasoning for the ANC or anybody to justifiably go and support Jacob Zuma. you're basically going to say, we are in support of the disregard of the rule of law. And that's something I'm sure the ANC is going to issue a stern warning to its supporters and its members. But that's not going to stop Jacob Zuma's personal army in the form of the now disbanded and defunct Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association to, fill a few taxis and risk coronavirus and go to Nkandla to create some sort of public spectacle. I think that there's going to be a desperate attempt to purport this sort of, country on the brink as a result of Jacob Zuma being sent to jail, because that has always been the threat, right? If something must happen to Jacob Zuma, the country will fall apart. Well, the country is very much intact today. How many hours after the judgment? More than 7 hours after the judgment. And so as a result, I think that there's going to be an effort to create this perception and to fuel that narrative. But I think that it's going to be a damn scoop by all accounts. And I think that the focus now is it should be on the process that must follow. Will he be appearing before the Nkandla police station? When will he be appearing? He will be transferred to which correctional facility? Who will be in charge? What, the important questions of what happens to him in relation to the salary that he gets. And all of those questions are now the more important thing as to, a few of his supporters, many of whom, people like Andile Lungisa, who are convicts themselves, Tony Yangeni, convict himself, poking holes at the judiciary and saying, this is a judiciocracy where, judicial dictatorship. I think that the time for those type of political maneuverings are over, and I think it's just now time for him to wear the orange overalls.
Peter, there was a specific paragraph in the judgment that you thought was particularly powerful. If I can ask you to maybe end tonight's session by reading paragraph 141, which was the last paragraph of Judge Kampepe's judgment before the order. And if I can just say to all our viewers looking tonight, please go and read this judgment. It is not only a powerful, seminal, historic judgment, it's also beautifully crafted and written, almost in a poetic way. It is definitely one of those judgments that's going to stand the test of time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Peter, if you can take us home, so to speak, and read paragraph 141.
My duty as I pen this judgment is cloaked in the duty and loyalty that I owe to our Constitution and the rule of law that undergirds it. I find myself with no option but to commit Mr. Zuma to imprisonment in the hope that doing so sends an unequivocal message. In this, our constitutional dispensation, the rule of law and the administration of justice prevails.
And that's where we leave it for tonight. Karen Moore, Quinita Hunter, Peter de Tooy, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you watching. There will be much more analysis and reporting on News24 tonight and in the days to come. We will be there every step of the way. We have our KZN correspondent Kavil Singh outside Nkandla as we speak. We will be there for you. We'll be your eyes, your ears. We will analyze, investigate, and report. Karen, do you have a last word?
No, I think that all has been said, but it is a fascinating day, and it's a good day for ultimately rule of law, and that is good for democracy. And if we have any chance of building a sustainable one, we've got to protect our judiciary, and we've got to protect our rule of law, and we've got to protect judges like Sisi Kampepe, who are prepared to put herself on the line like this. So good for her.
I can add nothing to that. Thank you so much. Good night, and see you soon. Goodbye.